Hi, everybody. I see there are 13 people out there somewhere in the world. Thanks for making your way here. This is a brand new world for me in a Zoom webinar. I have Zoomed many times for meetings and classes, but never in a webinar. So feels like a brave new world for sure. Like I'm kind of talking to no one. So I'm glad to see your names out there. I see some chats and some questions. I will do my best to approach this with a growth mindset. I'm quite sure if we do another webinar in a month or two, I will be better at it. So I apologize ahead of time for whatever strangeness we all might experience as far as screen sharing and managing the question and answer and chat. The setup for it is a little bit different from running a Zoom meeting or Zoom class. I think it is set so that you can chat me a question, and I have the Q&A open here. I will do my best to watch for your questions. Please let me know if there's a problem with the volume or if I think I'm sharing something and you can't see it, and I will try to fix the problem. So let's get started. My name is Melanie Peterson-Nafziger, and I am the Upper Adolescent Program Director at Great River. I have worked at Great River since 2007, and I'm really excited to talk with you tonight about standards-based grading and the 1 through 7 scale that your students are probably just starting to get familiar with. I think Charlie already sent out some information so that you have some links if you would like to take a look at some videos or frequently asked questions sheet from Great River with lots of questions and answers about standards-based grading. We are going to watch the video presentation that I also shared with the students back in their orientation time so that you can get a sense of the intentions of standards-based grading, as well as how standards-based grading will happen on the Schoology platform. And as soon as we're finished with that video, which is about 25 minutes, we will do some question and answer. I would love to hear what you're wondering about, or if you have concerns, or you're excited about this. All of it is welcome. And whatever I can't answer tonight, or if I end up with things on a to-do list of things to work on with the faculty, I'll be very happy for that outcome too. So feel free to use the chat to save information that you want me to see. I will save the text of the chat at the end of the webinar. So I don't see any questions, so I presume things are going okay. With that, I am going to begin the video about standards-based grading. Let's see, looks like I need to share my sound. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. All right. It says to share your computer audio, please install the Zoom audio device and restart your audio sharing application. All right, we're going to see how this works. And if the audio doesn't work, I can give the presentation without playing the video. So let's try this out and see if you can hear the audio. And if you can't, we will use Plan B, which I think the 2020-2021 school year is all about Plan B in all of our lives. So here we go. I will take a look at the chat and questions to see if you are able to hear this video as I get it playing.
Hi, I'm Melanie Peterson-Nafziger, Upper Adolescent Program Director at Great River, and I am sharing with you in this presentation today information about grading and assessment at Great River School in the Upper Adolescent and High School program at Great River this year. And I'd like to introduce you to standards-based grading and explain to you why we are shifting our grading to standards-based grading, which is something that's been piloted at Great River in individual courses for quite a few years now. And I'd also like to introduce you to the 1 through 7 scale that is part of the IB diploma program. And actually in the lower adolescent at Great River, guides for years now have been using a modified version of the 1 through 7 scale as well. So in this video, here we go. You can see an outline of what we're going to talk about, and let's get started. So first, why do we assess and grade? How does this play a role in school? Basically, we can think about assessment and grading in a variety of ways, and we can think of a variety of audiences for feedback and evaluation. And for students, sometimes follow-up work or practice work or homework activities in class, in classes, those experiences are often assessment for learning. So this is a space for students to develop their knowledge and skills and to work with examples of high quality exemplars so they can learn what sophisticated thinking or use of facts to support arguments might look and feel like. And so formative work, this kind of homework that's rich with feedback and practice, is a place for students to learn, to develop their knowledge, to develop their skills, to start to understand conceptual ideas that tie together information and skills. And so in homework and formative learning, we're really looking for students to learn. And then there are also types of assessment and grading that are related to students demonstrating their learning. So this is a demonstration of learning. And that's what we want to grade in the upper adolescent program at Great River School. So for students, they both learn from doing assignments and engaging with evaluation and feedback and assessment, and they demonstrate their learning. Think about this like a driving test. First, students take behind the wheel and they take driver's education and they spend hours and hours and hours practicing and getting feedback, whether it's from family members or driver's ed teachers. And then eventually, that's all formative practice work. Eventually, at the end of that driving experience, they go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and they try to get their driver's license by proving that they have mastered the beginning skills of driving enough that they're safe to be out on the road. That is what we would call summative assessment. So our goal this year is that students receive rich, not just feedback, but what's called feed forward. So this is information that and evaluation that guides give them, that guides might facilitate them figuring out through self-reflection on their own work. And also peers may give them ideas about how to elaborate and improve and expand their thinking and their connection to ideas from courses at a time that actually lets the students use that information to further learn and further improve their ideas. Also, feed forward is looking at trying to give feedback on a limited number of things. So it's not so much evaluative information that it just overwhelms the person receiving it, but instead it's strategic and really focused on helping students to learn and grow. And then for guides, when students are doing practice work, homework and activities in class, guides are using that assessment to both measure what students know and can do and what maybe they need to reteach, because a lot of students have not fully understood an idea or concept or need to further practice a skill. So they're using the assessment to actually influence their instruction. And then they're also looking at data and trends. You know, are there special lessons they need to give to some students who are still struggling with an idea while other people are ready to move on? So they're using the assessment to help the students learn and develop skills, as well as to figure out exactly what strategies they're going to use for teaching. And then for caregivers, families, universities, we want our grading information that you receive to be specific, for you to understand what we're measuring in that grading, so tied to learning outcomes or learning objectives. And we want the final grades in students' courses to reflect what the student knows and the skills that are relevant in that class. So what is the 7-point scale? This is different from grading on the 100% scale. The 7-point scale is something that IB guides at Great River have been grading with for well over a decade. We will provide to the students clear descriptions of what work is like in each course for each of these numbers, 1 through 7. That way, when a student gets a score of 1 through 7, they can understand if they are maybe getting a score of 3, what they need to do to improve their score to a 4 or 5 or beyond if they're interested in continuing to develop their thinking and learning and demonstration of learning. And so when you see Schoology gradebook assignments, you'll see things assessed on this scale of up to 7 points. So you can kind of see here in this color coding how to interpret the 7. So basically, as you'll see in the next slides, the 5 through 7 area is kind of the equivalent of work at an A level. The 4 level is nearing proficiency at the B level. The 3 level is an area of concern. There's some proficiency, but there's a lot of growth to still do in knowledge and skills at the C level. And we're really concerned if students' work is at the 1 or 2 level, they're at risk of failing the course because they're not demonstrating learning in skills or knowledge. And so they really need some intervention and support there. Why would we change from the 0 to 100% traditional scale? If you think mathematically about that scale, even though many of us grew up with this scale, the F zone of the traditional scale is 0 to 59%. So there's this huge portion of that scale that gets dedicated to students failing a course. And then 10% goes to A, 10% to B, 10% to C, 10% to D. And the use of zeros in many ways on this scale can actually be showing whether or not a student is completing work, which is more about a habit of work, like an executive function behavior, but it doesn't necessarily reflect whether or not a student is learning in the course. I know in my many, many years of teaching, I've had students who learned a tremendous amount of work, learned a tremendous amount of information and developed critical thinking skills and struggled with executive function and work completion. Those are both important to report about, but if we mix them together in a grade, then what the grade means at the end of the course is difficult to interpret because it's no longer just about critical thinking skills and knowledge and understanding. It's also about habits of work, which kind of dilutes the crystal clear information that's connected to that grade. So the 1 through 7 scale gets rid of that idea of 0 to 59% being an F. And because we have detailed descriptors of what each of these numbers means that we'll share with families and students, it's really much less subjective than a teacher just giving an 8 out of 10 or an 80% for a grade. Instead, if a student gets a 4, they can clearly see in the descriptors, the descriptions of grading at each of these numbers, what they need to do to move their work toward a 5, for example. And we will always tie our assignments for follow-up work, homework, activities to learning objectives. So these are standards and skills. And when we tie the work that students are doing to learning objectives, that helps students know what the purpose of the work is. So instead of just saying, I'm doing this assignment because my teacher told me to, and I have to turn it in or I'll get a 0, they can say, I'm doing this lab because it's helping me understand how how plants grow our food. And it's going to help me demonstrate my end of unit project, where I'm really looking at the effect of light on food production or something. So they understand why a lab is helping them work toward a summative or end of unit assessment that they're working on. And so we get to the standards-based grading. At Great River this year, during this year of the pandemic and distance learning, students will be studying 3 to 4 classes at a time in the upper adolescent program in 4-week learning cycles. At the end of each learning cycle, students will demonstrate their final learning from the unit or learning cycle in a piece of summative work. Guides will do their best to make those summative assessments flexible and let students really try to find a way to devise a question and an assignment within that summative work that's personally meaningful to them. And hopefully maybe they can demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways. And again, like I mentioned in the last slide, you can see this 1 through 7 scale and how it will translate into a letter grade at the end of each semester in PowerSchool and on Great River transcripts. So let's take a little look at what will standards-based grading look like for students, guides, and families. When you're looking at the grading information in Schoology, you will see information about individual standards and assignments, and you'll also start to see mastery information. So guides will be sure to give numerous opportunities for students to demonstrate learning in formative work, which is the practice work that helps them prepare for the summative final work where they demonstrate their mastery. And so our hope is that we can see our students maybe as beginners on work in weeks 1 and 2, where they're working at kind of a 2 or 3 level, which is kind of a C or D level. And then as they practice, think about beginning drivers. You know, they're just trying to learn how to make a right turn and stay in their lane. By the time they get to weeks 3 and 4 in the learning cycle, they've really started to understand the big ideas of the unit, and they've developed good thinking and working skills. And they're getting to the 4 and 5 level, where they're getting into the ranges of an A or a B. So the way standards-based grading will work is we are measuring their final mastery of a learning objective. So their grade will be tied to what they're able to demonstrate on a learning objective by the end of the learning cycle. So just like when a driver goes to try to get their driver's license, they don't get their driving skills averaged from all of driver's education and their practice driving. Instead, they demonstrate their final, where they've gotten with all that practice. This is the same with summative-based grading. We're looking at a student's work at the end of all of this learning. We're not averaging their assignment grades from the whole learning cycle. So why is this helpful for student learning? You can think about athletes. If you've ever played on a sports team, or you like to watch sports, or you know people who play on sports teams, we practice a ton to become great athletes. And then in the end, you're in games or competitions or matches, and that's where you're demonstrating where you've gotten. So if a player or a team struggled with skills in the beginning of practice in August, but by November are really excelling, they might make it to the state tournament, even though in the beginning they struggled. And so here we can kind of see, you know, you've got targets for what you want to try to accomplish with your practice, and you get feedback on how you're doing, and then you get coached on how to improve those skills and work toward your targets. That's that kind of coaching interaction that we want students to have with their guides, where guides are coaches and students are aware of where they're currently at, and they get good feed forward. So this is proactive feedback that's given at a time where students still have time to work with it to improve their knowledge and skills. And so as we all get used to Schoology, we'll be able to figure out how to use the data that's there that will be so much more rich than just a big list of grades on assignments, because we'll be able to see information on particular learning objectives, and we'll be able to see growth, hopefully, in those learning objectives. And guides will be able to see when students have mastered some of those objectives but are still struggling in other skills, and try to target their teaching and support for students in the areas that they have yet to master. So I've already talked a bit about formative and summative assessments. So we want to think about formative assessments as the places where students are practicing and getting feedback and really diving into constructing their understanding. So it's smaller tasks. Sometimes these won't be graded at all. In fact, the formative assignment might be something that they turn in as an exit ticket as they leave a class. Or it might be a quiz that helps them understand what they know and also what they haven't learned yet, but the grade doesn't specifically hurt their grade for the course. It's just a checkpoint to measure understanding. And the formative work is essential for being prepared to demonstrate learning in the summative work. So though we will not give zeros for missing work, the formative work is absolutely required at Great River. If students are struggling and not turning in their formative work, rather than giving them an F or a 0, we will give them extra support, and we will help them troubleshoot what's getting in the way of completing the work, or if they're struggling to understand, with extra time at group independent work or office hours, because we want them to develop that thinking and learning that's going to help them show what they know when they get to the summative point of the learning cycle. So we can think about, if you like to cook or if you like to eat, when the chef is tasting their soup along the way, they're figuring out, does it need more salt? Does it need more curry powder? Should I add a little bit more garlic or whatever? And then by the time you might be a guest at someone's house, or if you're eating at a restaurant, that's the summative evaluation where you're tasting the soup when the soup is finished. So we're not going to grade students as they are tasting their soup that they're making during the learning cycle. We'll give them feedback in the form of the 1 through 7 scale, but those grades won't be averaged into their final grade. Instead, their grade will be rooted in what they're able to demonstrate by the end of the learning cycle in their summative work. And here you can see another example of, the robotics team. They work so hard developing their robot and programming and working with companies to get support and to learn. And yet they don't get assessed on that formative practice and all those hours spent building. What matters is when they get to the first robotics competition, can their robot perform on the task for the year? That's the summative demonstration of learning, and that's the part that counts for evaluating how their team did in the season. Same for summative assignments and assessments at Great River in the upper adolescent program. So as far as formative and summative work, like I said, if students are struggling with work completion on their formative assignments, then they will be required to attend group independent work. And group independent work will occur on the 2 days per week that they don't have synchronous lessons with their guide. So for example, if Anu is teaching global politics on Monday and Thursday in person in synchronous lessons, then on Tuesday and Friday, Anu will supervise group independent work. And that will be a Zoom window open where students either can drop in to collaborate with each other or to ask Anu for support. That's optional for people who are keeping up with their work. And then for people who are struggling with work completion, they'll be required to attend this group independent work so they can check in with their teacher, get help, collaborate with their friends, and have a teacher right there to ask a question at the push of a button while they're working. Students have also talked with us about how this kind of structure to have specific time where they're going to make progress on assignments would help them kind of focus their work in this time of distance learning. And so this required group independent work is part of attendance for that course. So it will be essential that if a student is required to attend group independent work, that they do indeed attend, because this is part of attendance for the course. So rather than giving a 0 or an F for missing work, we will offer additional support. Some students will start the learning cycle September 21st, required to attend group independent work. And then once they demonstrate that they're keeping up with their learning and fully engaging in their classes, then we will release them to independence. And group independent work time will become optional for them. In Schoology, you'll notice that guides will put assignments in with a naming code. So they'll have a code for the name of the course. In this case, it's a Harry Potter reference. And the F that comes next is telling students and families that this is a formative assignment. And then the final project or exam or presentation will have an S, and that stands for summative. So students can kind of prioritize their time and know when they are at the final match where they need to demonstrate what they've learned and what they can do. So as you're looking at Schoology, we will provide information for interpreting Schoology throughout the first learning cycle or two, because it's a system that's new for all of us. But what you'll see there will be 1 through 7 scores on learning objectives tied to students' formative work. This is practice work that's helping them develop knowledge and skills. And then you'll also see a summative score also on that 1 through 7 scale. At the end of the learning cycle, the student will get, so in this case for our first learning cycle, this will be around October 14th. Guides will assign a summative grade for that learning cycle on the 1 through 7 scale. So if a student has earned a 5 out of 7 on their summative work, and maybe there's a nice pattern of formative work that started at a 2 or 3 and has worked toward a 5, it's showing how much the student has learned throughout the cycle. That's kind of an in-progress grade for the semester. It's like a quarter grade. It won't go on to the Great River transcript. That only happens after the whole first semester is over. But it's good feedback for the student and caregivers that at that point in the semester, the student, if they had a 5 out of 7, would be earning the equivalent of an A in the course. And they'll have one more learning cycle in that semester before they get their final semester grade, which will be translated into the letter grade for the Great River transcript. So remember, 5 through 7 on the 7-point scale will translate into an A, a 4 translates to a B, a 3 to a C, 2 to a D, and a 1 or insufficient work shown. So if students just have not demonstrated their learning with significant work during the learning cycle and semester, then they will fail the course. So finally, we're thinking about, in this challenging year, how do we give students rich feedback that helps them learn and that creates space for them to struggle and make mistakes and get feedback, and then finally learn something and get rewarded with a growth mindset where they don't get penalized for struggling and working hard and then learning something by averaging their grades, but instead they demonstrate what they know after lots of support and time. And when we're thinking about equity, how do we have grading really let students receive all the support that they need throughout the semester before they get a final grade that sticks on their transcript? So we really want to just reintroduce you to a term that I brought up at the beginning of the presentation, thinking about feed forward. And you can read an article about this at the Cult of Pedagogy if you would like to, if you just Google feed forward and Cult of Pedagogy. But the idea is feedback, the traditional way that teachers and bosses and lots of people give feedback, is to evaluate someone at the end and tell them what was good and what was bad and point out problems and maybe give way too much information. And it often comes at a time when a student is done with a unit, so like a unit exam or a paper. So if you get feedback, but it's at a time when you can't act on it because you're moving on with the course, then it's not all that useful. And research shows we really don't learn that much from that kind of feedback. So our goal this year with standards-based grading is to really give feed forward. This is rich, formative information and evaluation all throughout the learning cycle with clear learning outcomes that students know that they're working toward. So right at the beginning of the month of a learning cycle, guides will already tell the students what the summative assignment is going to be, and they'll share clear criteria for how that summative assignment will be graded, so that throughout the month, the student knows what kind of skills and knowledge they need to develop to demonstrate in that summative work. And then the teacher is a coach throughout the month, helping the student find resources, helping the student develop ideas. And the student is very much the learner who is in charge. So they need to tap into their curiosity. They need to reach out and access their guides and their peers, whether it's in study groups or office hours or independent work time. And the guides will provide this feed forward when it still has the potential to make an impact in the students' learning. So we will provide more information in the GRS newsletter about standards-based grading and the 1 through 7 scale. We're really excited to roll this out in the upper adolescent program this year. Schools across the country and universities too are using standards-based grading, in particular in this year of the pandemic and distance learning, to give students lots of support and feedback before a grade is assigned, and to let us all struggle in this difficult year and still learn and achieve, but work from a growth mindset. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to more conversation about grading and assessment throughout the year.
Okay, thanks. We made it to the end of the video. I miss seeing your faces all so much. I think of all the years of doing IB information nights and hearing people laugh and seeing you smile. It's a strange new world. So you heard the video there. I think Charlie shared that video, so you're welcome to watch it again or share it with your family members if there are other people that you would like to see that. And I'm now taking a look at the question and answer, and I see at least one other question in the chat. So I will do my best to try to read the questions and also keep the night rolling. Please just keep on sending your questions my way. And if somehow I don't fully answer it tonight, I'm happy to follow up via Zoom or phone call or on email, or if there's something that you would like more of an information night on in the future, let me know that topic too, and I'd be happy to tackle it. Let's see. So I am taking a look at the first question I see here is, I love the rationale of this philosophy. I'm curious, however, how this grading system translates to higher education. Are more colleges and universities moving to this approach? Does the system prepare students for a post-secondary experience? I would say universities are all over the map on how they assess. Some of them are still using the most traditional kinds of grading because they're not so student-centered and they just follow the traditions that they've had. Then there are other Ivy League universities like Brown University that don't even assign grades, and the students very much are not even choosing regular majors, and they're piecing together a course of study that's deeply meaningful, and they just fulfill some general requirements to get their degree, but they move through their college experience without grades. As you read about equity this year in particular, over the summer, organizations across the country were publishing that this competency-based grading or proficiency-based grading or standards-based grading is the way that the country should be approaching grading this year because of what a complicated year it is. I would say, does it prepare students for university? One of the most significant outcomes, I think, of standards-based grading is that students become aware of their own learning. And hopefully, as they are figuring out what what's going well and what they're struggling with, and also hopefully finding topics that they're deeply interested in. They are kind of metacognitive about their thinking and about their skills, and also just learn to be reflective. As teachers, experiment with what kinds of summative assessments they're using. Some of those are pretty predetermined in the IB diploma program in grades 11 and 12. And yet there are lots of steps along the way where people are doing role plays or debates or projects, maybe math tied into architecture or design. The more our students can intrinsically become interested in what they're learning, especially in high school, I think the more they have some clarity about what is thrilling to them and exciting about learning, and that feeds their interest in moving on to university or college. So I think feeling ownership over their learning versus just kind of slogging through completing assignments because teachers have told them to do assignments, that energy and thrill of getting in touch with their own construction of knowledge should serve them well at university. When I think about how universities sometimes are assigning grades, they probably, I don't think they often are using standards-based grading where they're so explicit about the learning objectives with assignments. And yet, when you think about assessment where students are needing to participate in discussion posts and read a lot every week during the semester at university, and then create some presentations or projects or papers or tests that are where their grades kind of come from. I think universities to some extent are looking at kind of the outcome of students' learning rather than grading and averaging everything along the way. There's certainly plenty of formative work that you do at the university's level that doesn't get graded. Hopefully you get feedback on that learning. Next I see, can you speak to the difference between work under the categories of completion and formative on Schoology? It appears to me that works under the completion categories are simply given a complete or an incomplete, and formative works are assignments for which a grade on the 1 through 7 scale is being used. Am I interpreting this correctly? Good question. And certainly the learning curve with Schoology, just understanding what it's doing behind the scenes in our classes, as well as what its possibilities are for creative student-centered use, are a constant learning curve, I think, for the guides and for the students and for the families. Even for our Schoology tutor from a company that is helping answer questions for guides, he's learning every week just to try to answer our questions. So I would say if a guide is assigning any kind of assignments along the way right now in weeks 1, 2, 3 of the learning cycle, these are probably formative assignments. I guess it's possible in some classes with more discrete units, maybe they would have 2 summative assessments in the course of a month-long learning cycle. It kind of depends what kind of course is being taught, but generally something that's marked as complete or incomplete, I could picture might be an assessment for learning. In that case, the guide is asking the students to undertake this activity, or maybe listen to this podcast, or watch a documentary, or read an article, or do a problem set, because they know that the students will learn from doing that task, but it's not necessarily a task that the guide feels like they need to assign a grade to, or maybe it's not a task that they're going to give explicit feedback to each student. Based on the student's engagement. So they might just mark it as complete or incomplete, like did the student engage in that task or not. That would still be formative for the student's construction of knowledge. If the guide also maybe, like I mentioned, an exit ticket in that video, if you, let's see, in global politics, if you're talking about a couple different theories of international relations, and at the end of class you ask a student to analyze the United States withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords in the context of one of the theories, and each student needs to turn in a little exit ticket, so maybe make a post on a discussion thread, you might mark it as complete or incomplete to just track students' engagement with the conversation, but again, you may not be grading that with a letter grade. And yet as a teacher, you can kind of see, oh, out of those 25 people, 18 of them understood how to apply that theory to that situation, but 7 of them really struggled with it. So you might either offer a lesson during group independent work to those 7 students, or you might assign. Schoology actually will let us assign tasks to individual students. So you might ask them to watch a 3-minute video summary or something on that theory. That is all formative. For the 1 through 7 scale, when an assignment is literally marked formative with that F, not the F full letter grade, but F, the symbol for formative, when they choose to use the 1 through 7 scale, so they tie those criteria to the assignment when they make the assignment in Schoology, they're choosing to use the 1 through 7 scale because they want to give the student evaluative feedback. So they are like judging the quality of the students' work and trying to coach them on how to improve their learning. That is formative in the sense that it's practice and it's feedback, and it will influence their grade because hopefully the student is learning, but it won't directly average into the grade. So all of those are formative. The complete or incomplete, or the 1 through 7 scale, are just 2 different grading scales that a guide might choose to tie the assignment to. But all of that practice work falls into that category of formative. So a place to construct knowledge, but not an average from September 21st to October 13th or 14th of grades. Next, I see, hi, I'm wondering how students will keep track of homework and expectations. Mine says that she gets a few assignments from each teacher every day rather than a packet, and I'm concerned that she will fall behind because the volume is changing daily. Let's see. Well, we've asked guides on Schoology to build their learning cycles with weekly folders. So when we go into any course, and I hope that as parents and guardians and caregivers that you have received Schoology login information. If you haven't, please let Stacy, Krager, or me know, and we'll make sure to get you connected. When you go in there, you should, like I was just in the Theory of Knowledge course page recently, there are week 1, week 2, week 3, and week 4 folders, and those folders contain all the information that the student needs to work with in that week. So there might be material that they're going to use and access during their synchronous lesson on Tuesday, and that information is there. There may be a like discussion post or something that they need to post at to participate in an asynchronous day for attendance. That information is also there. And then if there's something due on Friday, which usually a guide will post an asynchronous lesson or activity that the students work on their own during the week. And it's usually due Friday, though people might make it due earlier if it is something they're going to use in class on Thursday, for example. That will be in that folder as well. The guides also should be when they make a due date tied to a material that they add to Schoology, that due date should also show up on their course calendar on Schoology. So the course calendars are a good place to track what's going on in classes as well. But I would say it's a lot to learn how to navigate Schoology and to just figure out the systems. We'll all be much better at this in December than we are in September. So I guess I would say for any student who's feeling like, whoa, there's a lot of information and it's tricky because you can't just stop by and ask your teacher a question the same way you might have if you saw them in the hall or something, I would say encourage your student to go to that group independent work, even if they aren't required to go to it. Or Wednesday mornings, every guide has office hours in the upper adolescent from either 9 to 10 or 10 to 11. And that's a great place to stop by and just check in and say, this is what I think I'm supposed to be working on this week. Am I missing anything? So I would say stay in touch with the guides, especially in this first month or two, to just make sure that they're understanding the information that's there on Schoology. The next question, this one, I love this question, and I have one answer that's probably pragmatic for this year and also another answer that is the ideal in a regular year. The question is, do summative assignments or projects allow for feedback or revision before a final grade is earned? In a regular year where we had 2 semesters, where you see your students consistently through those semesters, and so you're not in these shorter learning cycles, which we created to try to reduce the number of classes that students are enrolled in at once, based on the stress that we noticed last spring in students when they were taking 6 or 7 classes simultaneously. In a regular semester, absolutely, I would be coaching guides to allow revision as long as students really put in significant relearning effort. And I would ask the guide to regrade the assignment and replace the original grade with the new grade that the student has earned. Because again, in standards-based grading, the goal is that we help students learn and that the grade reflects their final mastery of the content and skills. So that is the most pure implementation of standards-based grading for sure. We have these tricky learning cycles that are short this year because of the pandemic and distance learning, and that makes revision and regrading a little bit more complicated because if students finish a big project or a paper or take an exam at the end of this month in mid-October, they then go on to 3 other classes. And what we don't want is for all the teachers to just kind of snowball their work and have their classes spill into the next learning cycle so that students kind of are still enrolled in 6 classes. We really want the students to be able to move into their next 3 or 4 courses without a pile of work left over. What I will say about this, though, is when you think about a semester at Great River this year, for example, September 21st to the end of January, the students will have 2 learning cycles per course, making up that semester grade. So when the students finish in mid-October with their learning cycle A, they'll move on to learning cycle B for a month, and then they'll come back to learning cycle A and take another intensive month of coursework in those courses before they get a semester grade. So what I've asked guides to think about regarding the grade from learning cycle A is, let's think about that as an in-progress grade. So at this point in the semester, this is the score that the student is earning. And it's also good feedback for families and students, I think, to see if everything stays the same for the next learning cycle, then they're likely to get a 3 or a C, for example. And yet, if the student then is working with some of those learning objectives in the second learning cycle, and they clearly have extended their knowledge and skills related to that learning objective, then the guide should give them the benefit of the doubt on that second learning cycle of work and give them the higher score. So they won't be reworking a paper, for example, necessarily from the first learning cycle again in the second learning cycle. And yet, if they have now demonstrated further ability to use evidence to support an argument, then the guide should give them the score that reflects where they're at in late January, not where they were in mid-October. If a student is working on a bigger IB internal assessment, for example, like a big math paper or a big art project, it may be something that actually does spill from learning cycle to learning cycle. And in that case, like from learning cycle A to the learning cycle A that will begin again in November, then absolutely, they should be revising those assessments and furthering their grade and their knowledge through extra work and feedback from the guide. So the grade that will be on the semester transcript, you'll probably get that transcript in February because the semester ends in late January. That grade will be 1 grade per course. When you look at the transcripts of Great River, you won't know that there's any kind of difference in our grading this year. It will look just like previous years with letter grades for each course, for each semester. That grade should reflect where the student has gotten by the end of the semester. So it's important that the guides don't just average the 2 learning cycles together. If a student was working on learning objectives in learning cycle A from September and October, and they were kind of working mostly at a 3 level, and then by the end of their second month in learning cycle A, they were working at a much higher level at a 5 or a 6, then they would move to the A- or the A if the learning objectives have been consistent over the semester. So guides will need to make a decision about, does it make sense for the assignment to have revisions done to it, or are they really moving on to very different content and skills where the chances for revision are kind of limited. The goal, though, is that a summative assessment would never be on skills or knowledge that there haven't already been multiple rounds of formative feedback and work together on those skills and knowledge. So a summative assessment should never be a surprise. In fact, the guides right now should be sharing the learning objectives and the criteria that they'll use to grade those summative assessments in these first weeks of the learning cycle so that the students know what they're working toward for mid-October. Next I see, thanks for letting us know assignments are listed in Schoology. Will the listings link to the actual assignments, math problems, questions, etc.? Or will students have to go to email to find the actual assignment? If all works well in Schoology, everything will live there in the upper adolescent. There are parts of ManageBack or Google Classroom that we're all missing because there were some aspects of those programs that were great, but we really want to try to stay in Schoology. So it's possible that Schoology will link to a platform like Google Drive through an assignment, or a student might submit a Google Doc as a form of their work. But the assignments and the calendar that shows you what's due and the guide's directions, those should all live right in Schoology. And really, even with email, we can communicate through Schoology now, although I think we're still in a transition period. I know for me to be able to email all of you or to email all the students, I don't have a group or a list on Schoology yet where I can easily contact you. So for at least a few weeks, I'll probably still use email because I know exactly how to send a message to everyone at once without finding you one at a time in Schoology. And I want to make sure that parents and guardians have had time to join Schoology. Another question, let's see. I love the notion of the student being an active learner and taking charge, but I'm concerned that we aren't giving enough weight to the burden of distance learning. Will students be too bogged down by the meeting requirements to let their curiosity flourish with school this year? Such a good question. This summer, as we were grappling with realizing what this school year might look like as far as distance learning being a reality for many of us for a significant amount of time, part of the reason we devised this schedule with learning cycles was to try to create an experience that could be more intensive on fewer classes. So last spring in the upper adolescent, we were just teaching one class per week, one synchronous lesson, and 6 or 7 classes simultaneously. And I think the students were very stressed, and work completion and work engagement and any kind of vigor for learning really plummeted. So our hope is that though their learning will be intense in these 3 IB classes or electives that they're taking, they are taking 3 or 4 if they're taking theory of knowledge instead of 6 or 7. And so hopefully they can dive a little deeper and be able to engage with more curiosity, since they'll have fewer classes that they're trying to juggle and manage the to-do lists or assignments for. And as the year goes, we're also going to be working on learning about teaching through inquiry, which would mean kind of like when you think of the first, second, and third period lesson of a Montessori lesson, that guides provoke students' curiosity, give them the first period to kind of invite them to inquiry, and then guides provide resources and connections and listen to students' interests and try to connect them to resources and to help them develop their learning, but let the students step into the role of inquirer. So they're coming up with questions that they want to answer, and their curiosity might be driving which case study they're studying or which data they're grappling with maybe. So that is a goal for this year. I think in this year of the pandemic, to have culturally relevant and responsive learning that's really student-centered will help people feel like what they're learning at school can connect to things that they're caring about out in the world. Why not finish the learning cycle all in one go instead of switching? We grappled with that question, and I think people felt like it was more important to be able to sustain the classes, the concurrency of learning is what IB calls it, over the course of the whole year, and to prepare students who are sitting for IB exams in May so that they're ready to take those exams when May starts. We really need to span the whole school year with both courses. If they studied 3 or 4 of their IB courses starting in second semester, they would really only get February, March, April in before their IB exams, and some of the information that they learned then or ideas that they explored in the fall would be pretty far away for being prepared for the kind of summative demonstration of learning in the IB world. But it is a good question. I think it's a thing that we're going to need to reflect on and consider through the course of the year. But we did decide that alternating probably made more sense for thinking about implementing the courses. And then I saw one question back from the video time was, what does a C mean for a formative assignment? And I wanted to quickly share my screen here and let's see. We'll see if screen sharing on the webinar is similar to in class. I think a way to maybe help you understand how this 1 through 7 scale works for students is to just show you a sample of, okay, here we go. Scrolling too fast. So all the IB guides, for example, have these 1 through 7 descriptors for each of the IB courses. So literature, Spanish is our language acquisition class, social studies, it's global politics, sciences, maths, multiple kinds of arts, and then the extended essay and theory of knowledge. So in each of these categories, there is a set of descriptors with that 1 through 7 scale. So for example, if you're thinking about a C on a formative assignment, remember that when we're looking at these grades 1 through 7 on the scale, 6 and 7 is a straight A. And in the video, I said 5 is an A, it's an A- actually. So there's the description of A- work, the description of B work, grade 4. And then if a student gets a C, which they won't see a letter grade until the end of the semester, but if they're consistently kind of getting 3s on their formative work, then that means they're kind of doing work at the C level. What we love about these 1 through 7 descriptors is a guide can sit down with a student, or the student can look at this on their own. I've asked guides to put the 1 through 7 descriptors for their course on their Schoology pages. If you look at grade 3, then a C level work on formative work would mean that that the student is demonstrating some knowledge and some understanding of the question or task. Their responses are only sometimes valid or appropriately detailed, some appropriate powers of expression, both orally and in writing. Remember, this is for a literature class. There are some lapses in accuracy and clarity, limited awareness of context and appreciation of the effect on the audience or reader, and some evidence of a structure within which the thoughts and feelings of the works are explored. And so if a student wanted to kind of move from this 3 or C level up to a higher grade or to a more sophisticated demonstration of knowledge, they could take a look with their guide. I especially suggest during office hours or indie work, and really take a look at what do I need to do to move from this 3 to the 4. And often a guide can also provide an exemplar, like an assessed piece of student work to show the students the difference between a 6 and a 3 in essays in English class, for example. And that can also be helpful for students just trying to get a sense of where they're at now and where they want to get to. Here I see, it sounds like formative assignments inform summative assignments, but summative assignments are most important to final grading. How would this work for students with performance anxiety or who happen to be sick or otherwise distracted when preparing or presenting the summative content? That is a good question. Let me just stop this screen share. So basically, the way that all that formative work informs the final grade is, like I said, we're not averaging every score that a student gets, because I think that penalizes students for not knowing something in September, even if they learn it by October or January. And yet the formative work along the way is helping the guide get a sense of what the student knows and what they can do. And so if there's a situation where a student is giving a presentation, for example, in global politics class, and the guide has had a variety of formative opportunities for students to demonstrate their knowledge in thinking in a global politics context and their knowledge of case studies and their ability to apply theories. And then say they're doing a presentation for their summative assessment and they're nervous and they kind of freeze up a little bit. That if they're taking the IB Global Politics exam, that presentation does get sent to the IB and that is their summative demonstration of learning. So say they got a 4 maybe on the 1 through 7 on that presentation, and yet the guide saw consistently that student was demonstrating that they actually have a 5 or 6 level of many of the pieces of knowledge and skills. In that case, there are a variety of ways that people assign grades in standards-based grading, and one is that they look at the most consistent demonstration of learning. So you might be looking for like the pattern that makes the most sense, and maybe that is a 4 for that student. There's also the question of most recent demonstration of learning. So the simplest way to assign the grade is just look at what is the summative score and give the letter translation from like a 4 to a B. And yet the guides really should be thinking holistically through what the students know and can do and trying to assign the grade that best reflects that. So we would never penalize a student and say, well, you got a bunch of 3s in September, and even though you got a 5 in January, we're going to average in those 3s. And yet the guide should take into consideration if that student was demonstrating a higher level of skills and knowledge throughout the semester or in the last couple weeks, and then they kind of froze, they should give the benefit of the doubt. We're really looking for, can the student demonstrate the knowledge and skills at that level on that learning objective? And the summative is their final chance to do that. And that's why the formative work is coaching them there. And yet we shouldn't ignore if the student has consistently demonstrated that knowledge and skill, even in formative work. And again, give the benefit of the doubt. The goal is for the focus to be on the learning and not the grades, and yet for the grades to accurately represent what the student knows and can do. And I think also as a small school, and right now with learning cycles this year, the guides have half the number of students that they often have in a regular semester-long class where everybody's in their class the whole semester. It does create a little more space for students and guides to check in if there's like a summative disaster and see what they might be able to work out, especially in this tense year. So I see that we're at 7:34. I could stay and talk all night about standards-based grading and curriculum and instruction. I love this stuff. And yet I also know you probably have other things that you want to do tonight. So I'm happy to stay and keep answering questions. And yet I will not feel, my feelings will not be hurt if I see the attendees number dropping. But I do really appreciate you coming tonight, and I'm looking forward to more times to connect with you, maybe even where I can see you and laugh with you and feel together in support of your students. So thanks for coming, and I'm going to keep running through these questions, and feel free to keep asking as many as you have. I see some assignments have a letter C grade rather than a number. Oh, does that indicate that they are a formative assignment that is complete? Thank you for asking that. We are in the process of trying to figure that out in Schoology. So yes, I think probably what you're seeing is an assignment that is complete. You should never be seeing letter grades in the traditional A through F sense in Schoology. The only place that you'll see a letter grade this year is in PowerSchool at the end of a semester, when it's like the grade that's going to be on the transcript. And yet Schoology has these default settings that it uses to just enter things that aren't what the teacher is putting into the system. And this incomplete, complete, right now, we've been working with Troy, our Schoology tutor, about that exact question. Because we want to understand, what are you as families or the students seeing on your side when a teacher clicks complete or incomplete? I know one guide said he made an ungraded assignment that he just wanted to mark as complete or incomplete. And he clicked ungraded and made it, oh no, I think he clicked graded and then made it out of 0 points because he didn't want to be giving students scores on it. But then what he realized it put into Schoology for the student was, since it was out of 0 points, students who did the assignment got a 0 because it was out of 0 points. And students who did not complete the assignment got an I for incomplete, but the I looked like a 1. So for the students, they said, wait, I got a 0 if I completed it and a 1 if I didn't complete it, which was really an I. So unfortunately, I think there are going to be some learning curves of understanding that Schoology interface and what is Schoology doing behind the scenes. For example, if we mark something as missing, then Schoology puts a 0 in, which we're not using zeros to grade anything this year. So we're not comfortable with that 0 getting put in there because it's kind of misrepresenting what we're trying to communicate. So we will mark things as incomplete rather than missing so that that 0 doesn't get put in. But Schoology very much wants to make mathematical calculations with everything that it's doing. Similarly, PowerSchool will put percentages into scores even if we don't want it to have percentages. So yes, I would say a C, if you're seeing that in Schoology, if you can see someplace on the grade scale that this is a complete or incomplete assignment, then it's the C stands for complete. But we will continue to figure these things out and provide further information for caregivers as we're figuring out what the questions even are. I see a question here. How will caregivers know if their student is required to attend an independent group work to help support them in meeting their schedule? Thank you for asking that. Very much, I want you to understand, we've created this idea of group independent work not to constrain the students or punish the students or embarrass the students or something. What we want to do is be detectives and figure out what are the obstacles that are getting in the way of the students fully engaging in their work and completing their work, and then provide support so that we can help them feel successful. And our goal is early in this semester to provide a lot of support and communication and help guides and students build relationships with each other, especially if students are struggling. So that the students can feel successful from the start, and instead they don't get weeks and weeks behind and then we're struggling to try to help them pass, because that just doesn't feel good for anybody. So the steps kind of that happen, the guides already nominated students who they thought had struggled significantly, like maybe more in the spring with distance learning. Also students who are new students at Great River, students who have IEPs or 504s where that kind of structured support is really relevant for the kind of structure that will help them succeed. All of those students are starting this learning cycle required to attend group independent work. And so I sent them a message before September 21st, letting them know that they should attend group independent work starting last week when the classes started. This week, the guides should be emailing families and CCing the student if the student didn't show up for group independent work last week and they were expected to, so that you're looped into the communication too now. So we're trying to respect as adolescents that we first want to just reach out to the students so that they can work with the teacher and kind of get back on track, get answers to questions or prioritize their work without their families necessarily being pulled in. And yet we don't want that to last long if the student's not engaging with the support or is still struggling with work completion. So then week 2, the guide is contacting you as the family, letting you know that the student should be coming to group independent work. And at week 3, If they're still not showing up for group independent work or not coming to office hours, or they're still falling behind in completing their work, then the guide should decide, is it time to fill out a formal tier 1 intervention where they will document a plan that they're going to do with the student and also pass that on to the next teachers in the learning cycle B? If they do plan a formal tier 1 intervention, they will let the family know that that's what they're doing to try to help support the student. So the family should be contacted basically 2 out of those 3 weeks if the student is still struggling. Also, I would recommend turn on your overdue notifications in Schoology, especially if you know that your student sometimes struggles with work completion. I know I have learned in my Gmail inbox, I can set a filter and have my Schoology emails, because I get emails from every time a student turns an assignment in. For 180 students, I get an email. So it's hundreds of emails a day. But if you filter in your email inbox and then say skip the inbox, and I can send it to a Schoology folder, and then I can open the folder and look at it when I want to. That's helpful. So if you turn on the overdue notifications, then you'll immediately be alerted if your student is missing something, and yet you could have those messages filtered into a folder if you don't want them just there all the time. But that's the #1 way that you'll know that they might be falling behind. And then guides, like I said, should be contacting you this week. You also could ask your student, hey, did Melanie send you an email letting you know that you should be in group independent work? Once we've started the school year now, the guides will be the ones who would contact a student if they start falling behind. But in the beginning of the year, I reached out just because I already had a big list of people that guides had wanted to provide extra support. And then our goal is start with that support and structure and accountability. And as soon as people have their feet under them and are succeeding with completing their work, they move into independence and freedom, like a good Montessori student. And let me see, I think that's the last question there. I see in the chat, speaking as a faculty member at an institution of higher education and one who has used standards-based learning for a long time, you are on target to say that it depends on the institution. In fact, it depends on the faculty member and their training on how to teach. Oh, that's interesting. So maybe a little less consistency on requirements of how people teach. Yeah, I feel like my daughters are a sophomore and a senior in college, and from researching all those universities, I just think like university and college grading is all over the map. I know when I taught at the University of Colorado back in the 90s, there were specific requirements for grading, like you must give an average grade for all of your students as a B-. So they really were competing against each other for their grade. And I needed to prove mathematically that that was the average grade I gave. And yet I think there are a lot of universities and colleges that would not pit the students against each other competing for those kinds of grades. So it does feel like it really depends university by university or college by college. And I see one more thing. I think that parents are seeing a lot of C's when then they might be as complete and not a traditional grade of C. Yes, I agree. And like I said, if you're seeing a C in Schoology, it's not a letter grade. It's got to be complete. But I think knowing that you've asked, a couple people have asked that question, I'm going to try to go into Schoology as a parent of some of the students and just see what you're seeing, because what I'm seeing looks a little bit different. And I think I should make a talking sheet of common things that you're going to see in Schoology and how to interpret them. The other one I would say is just when you're thinking about that 1 through 7 scale, make sure that you don't think of like a 3 as 3/7, where it's like an F. If you're thinking percentage wise, it's quite different from that. The 1 through 7 are just numbers that are representing those descriptions of the student's work at each of those each point in the scale. So like a 3 or 4 it's very good, you know, average or a little bit above average work for students in these IB courses. So we have to kind of shift our minds away from thinking about the numbers as something mathematical and more as a representation of that paragraph that describes the student's work, which the guides and I will all work with students and families to interpret this throughout the year to make sure that you understand what you're seeing. In the end, we're going to have a much more data-rich world of understanding student learning, but it will take a little bit of time to just figure out the jargon and the systems. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for being here tonight. And please, as you're thinking about this or as you're trying to understand Schoology, don't hesitate to send me any questions or concerns or just requests for more information. I would love to provide exactly what you're wishing to know. So thanks, and hope you have a great night.